Good evening. My name is Yoav Elinevsky. I'm a member of the Racial Justice and Decolonization Working Group of MAPA. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Why is Massachusetts building a new prison? Now, we are aware of the problem that we have with mass incarceration in our country. We are also aware of the deep roots of mass incarceration in slavery, racism, and oppression of Black people in our country. There are many questions that we can ask about this phenomenon. What should be done about it? How can we move forward and end this oppressive, violent, torturous phenomenon? What does abolition mean? What is the role of the prison military industrial complex in this system of mass incarceration? But now we have a local problem. Our governor wants to use our money to build a new $50 million women prison. In a way, we need to thank Governor Baker for putting the issue of mass incarceration of women before us. Because now that our antennas are up, we are paying close attention to this issue. Specifically, why should we build $50 million new prison? Is there better things we can do with $50 million? Why should we keep grandmothers in prison in Framingham when they can go back to their communities and help their grandchildren grow and develop? Well, we also need to ask what can we do to stop the governor from spending $50 million of our money. So I expect us to have a very good conversation today, this evening, because we have with us three amazing women to talk to us about these issues. I know them because we worked together in September in the long march to end incarceration of women and girls in Massachusetts. Sashi James is a leader with Families for Justice with Healing, and she is a daughter of two formerly incarcerated parents. Lou Ellen Lambros is a policy director of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And Beth Whaley is an assistant professor of sociology at Framingham State University, and she is an active member with People Not Prison, which is a coalition of volunteers who operate under the leadership of Families for Justice and Healing. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the three speakers to be with us. And Sashi, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Yoav, for introducing me. My name is Sashi James, and I'm with Families for Justice Healing and the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. As Yoav mentioned, I'm a daughter of formerly incarcerated parents. I'm very grateful that my parents are home and welcome me every day. My father calls me every day, and those are just small things that I appreciate that some members of my community don't get the opportunity to. I always walk with Shanita Jefferson. She's a daughter who's currently fighting for her mother, Miss Angie Jefferson, who's currently incarcerated, who's been incarcerated for 30 years inside of Framingham. So we always send love to our incarcerated family members and our daughters who are fighting to free their mothers and other family members. I'm going to share my screen. So this is us, Families for Justice as Healing. These pictures are from our long walk, which we'll get to. It's supporting the prison and jail moratorium bill. And then Families for Justice Healing and the National Council for Incarcerated, formerly incarcerated women and girls. We operate under 3 buckets of work, which is 1, the policy, hyperlocal organizing, and campaigns. Our primary theory of change is base building. Over the past 5 years, we have worked on operationalizing our goal of ending incarceration of women and girls. We know we can end incarceration of women and girls in Massachusetts by building leadership in formerly incarcerated and directly affected women and girls within their neighborhoods through hyperlocal organizing under a model we call reimagining communities. Before I get to reimagining communities and to the reason why we're even here, which is to stop this new women's prison, I just like to talk about some of the work that's currently happening in communities that are over incarcerated and under resourced. And one of those few projects right now, oh wait, before I even get there, we have to talk about the history of why Families for Justice even exists. Families for Justice is Healing, it has a really dope history, which is it started inside of a prison yard in Danbury. At the time, there were women sitting at the table, and one of those women were my mother. At the time, they realized there was over 100 years of incarceration at the table. Through just sitting at the table, there was an uptick of ending mass incarceration. However, women were not being talked about. The conversation of mothers being separated from their children was just not at the table. And so the women, the strong women, Taz, my mom, Sister Virginia, they really brought their voices to the table to say, hey, we're going to end incarceration of women and girls. And so this that you see right now is just 3 buckets of work that we work to mobilize to end incarceration of women and girls. One of our biggest models right now is reimagining communities. And reimagining communities is really important because as we talk about why we need to end incarceration of women and girls, we also have to talk about how we're going to end incarceration of women and girls and how we're going to stop the cycle of women and girls from even entering in prisons from the first place, and also shifting the narrative from reimagining prisons to reimagining communities so we could begin to build up people and not prisons. And this is my daughter. Good job. That's my daughter. Obviously, we work really closely. So right now, currently, Families for Justice as Healing has, we launched a basic income guarantee program, which gives 5 women that are formerly incarcerated just $500 a month, no stipulations. We, in a nutshell, we just finally got a crisis response van, which we'll have parked in the most incarcerated corridor. Now, where I live from Nubian Square to Franklin Field. That is the most incarcerated corridor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So when we talk about building a new women's prison, we're talking about that's going to be only impacting the Black and Brown community that I live in. I was raised there. My mom always brags that we're the 5th generation living in the house. And so we are working within that corridor, which is Humboldt Ave, to figure out how we could increase public safety without police and prisons and jails and more cameras in our area. And so through our listening tour, we realized one of the most reasons why women end up incarcerated in the first place is because they didn't have access to affordable housing. And so that was just one reason. But other reasons was people weren't able to go to school. People didn't have the access to go to school. Public education in our community is horrible. We don't have access to fresh vegetables. And so Families for Justice as Healing is really changing that in the community. We have purchased a hydroponic farm, which will be able to give fresh vegetables to the community. And all of this is just community work. It's not system acting work. It's really members of the community, formerly incarcerated women, just doing what they see fit in the community to really create a healthy, thriving community. So we have the hydroponic farm, which is going to be amazing. We'll be able to give community members within the most incarcerated corridor, we'll teach them how to grow vegetables. We'll give them vegetables. It's just going to be a beautiful project. We also have a van that will eventually act as a crisis response van. So when people are having mental health issues or substance breakthroughs, we'll be able to provide the right needs that they need other than calling 911. It'll act as an alternative to calling the police. And it's going to be really beautiful. And hopefully we'll be able to really pick up the crisis response vans and implement them into different communities that really need mental health treatment. Yes. Okay, cool. And so, yes. Here. And so and then also, yes, milk, we don't have milk. Sorry, y'all. And so, Katori, okay, please. And so through that, we have, we have the Hydroponic Forum, we have the mobile van, and then we have our massive People's Not Prison volunteer base that has helped us mobilize all of our bills, including the prison and jail moratorium bill and the primary caretaker bill. So I'm gonna pass it to Beth, and then Beth can talk about how she's been a part of the People's Not Prison.
Hi, everyone. How are we doing? Absolutely. I saw the comment in the chat about how kids are part of the movement, and Katori is such a good part of this movement. If you are around enough, you might have heard Katori give testimony on these bills. Katori always makes her voice heard, and that's amazing. Thank you so much, Sashi. And hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Monday night in the dark here talking with us about these really important issues. As mentioned, my name is Beth Whaley, and I am a member of People Not Prisons, which I'll talk about in a second. But first, I want to talk about a little bit about a point that Sashi made when she was talking, which is the idea that this new prison being proposed would incarcerate generations. But she was really clear that it won't be incarcerating all these generations of families. It'll specifically be a prison that incarcerates those who are already the most criminalized people in Massachusetts, living in the most heavily policed corridor, right? It's not all generations. It's just few, disproportionately people of color, disproportionately African-American people, and in the case of this women's prison, disproportionately African-American women, specifically poor ones. And yet, right? I want us to take a second and think. You knew I was going to turn this into a teaching moment. It's my reflex. We've all committed crimes, right? Think of yourself. Really think to yourself for a second. What transgressions have you committed over your life? We've all committed crimes. We're all criminals, right? Maybe you're thinking, no, not me. Well, I have a list of examples for you. Have you drank underage? Did you ever smoke pot before it was legal? This is what people are incarcerated for. There's still people in Massachusetts serving decades on pot, marijuana sentences. Have you ever held pot for somebody? You ever drink and drive? Taken a prescription that wasn't yours? Your parents ever give you a prescription because you didn't feel like getting the pain meds? Or did you ever give your prescription to somebody because they were in pain and couldn't make it to the doctor? That's a crime. Have you ever hit somebody in a moment of anger? Speeding? I mean, I like when I'm teaching, I like to say, what crimes have you committed today, right? Did you speed on the way here? Did you signal every time? Stealing, big one. Shoplifting, especially when we're younger. Skipping school is a crime. And I want us to think about the times we've made different decisions when we're struggling financially. Have we ever, when we're struggling financially, made a decision that we wouldn't make if we had more money? Or when we're in grief, when we're dealing with trauma, have we made a decision that, you know, in hindsight, when we're a little bit out of that grief and trauma, we would make a different decision? That's what we're talking about here. But as Sashi said, only some of us get criminalized for those things. We all commit crimes, and only some of us get criminalized. Disproportionately people of color, disproportionately people who have low incomes. The over-policed populations is how we talk about that. This prison replicates the idea, the proposal for this prison does not exist, and that's important. The proposal for this prison is replicating the idea that only some people need to be held accountable, even though we all do the same things. And that those people who need to be held accountable are the poorest and the people of color and their children. The war on drugs, you have asked me to talk a little bit about the war on drugs and mass incarceration. Happy to. So a lot of people, usually people know that the war on drugs is what caused mass incarceration. The United States has far and away the highest incarceration rate compared to any country, and it's not even close. Things that people usually don't know include that the war on drugs has actually disproportionately affected women. Why do you think this might be? Why would the war on drugs and mass incarceration be disproportionately felt by women? Any guesses? I'll tell you. It's mandatory minimums, actually. So part of the war on drugs, these policies were passed called mandatory minimums, saying that if somebody was caught committing a certain transgression, that they were mandatorily, statutorily going to get a certain amount of time. So why would that affect disproportionately women? Well, because 51% of incarcerated women have either 1 or 0 priors. So mandatory minimums, part of the war on drugs, disproportionately women don't have prior records when they get in trouble for the first time. And what happened in the 80s and 90s is that suddenly that first time offense, whereas before it would never get prison or jail, now all of a sudden women were being incarcerated for those offenses, regardless if they have had kids, regardless of their circumstances. That was what was different. And that's disproportionately been women because they're less likely to have a prior criminal record, their first incarceration. And of course, that also means disproportionately poor Black women. Actually, there's scholars who refer to the war on drugs as the war on poor Black women, because that's disproportionately who's being incarcerated by it. I have some stats for you. If you want some stats, you don't have to take my word for it. From 1994 to 2004, this like height of mass incarceration, women's incarceration increased at twice the rate of men. Twice the rate of men. We always talk about mass incarceration. We usually think about men. What I love about what Families for Justice as Healing is doing is focusing in on incarcerated women. And why? That's because usually when we talk about incarceration, we think of men, even though women are incarcerated at a much faster rate than men are. And for Black women are incarcerated at 4 times the rate of white women. And Latino women are incarcerated at 1.5 times the rate of white women. So women are being incarcerated more quickly, though the numbers are still lower than men. And the racial disproportion plays out in these incarcerated populations. So I have all this information. I know these things as a scholar, and I'm like, I have to do something, right? I have to do something about this besides talk in a classroom about it. And that is why I joined People Not Prisons, which is the slide that you see on your screen now. People Not Prisons is, covered my camera with my notes. People Not Prisons is a volunteer pool that runs in service of Families for Justice as Healing. It's Families for Justice as Healing, as you've heard, is an organization led by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. And so People Not Prisons is therefore led by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. And that's super important to me and to all the volunteers in the group. Things that we've done have included supporting the Long March Through Massachusetts. Yoav's brilliant idea that I'm sure you've heard about, and he mentioned at the beginning, as well as general awareness raising. We also provided marshals. We've done research into the architecture firms that have put out plans to be the ones that are all clamoring to be the ones to build these new cages for disproportionately poor Black women, right? So we've done research into those architecture firms. We at one point were doing weekly protests outside of HDR, which is the architecture firm that got the contract for the prison that is going to be built, they think, that we're organizing against. HDR is the architecture firm that has it. And one angle in our work as People Not Prisons has been this idea that there's no such thing as a trauma-informed prison. HDR, when they came out with their proposal, said, we're gonna make a trauma-informed prison. So I'm here as expert in the in the field to tell you that no research has ever found that there is such thing as a trauma-informed prison. It's a misnomer. It's not a thing that exists. It's a thing that is talked about politically, but doesn't exist. Sort of like when you hear some politicians calling late-term abortions partial birth abortions, right? That doesn't exist, but it is very convenient politically to make you feel the way that politicians want you to feel. And so when we talk about a trauma-informed prison, it makes us feel more comfortable with the idea of prison, but that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a trauma-informed prison. People need accountability for their harms, but that accountability happens in community. Change doesn't happen in a prison, change happens in community. That's where we think accountability can happen. Happy to talk more about People Not Prisons. Hope that you join up with us. One way you can get involved if you're sitting here and hearing all of this and you're like, what can I do? We have a lot of takeaways for you. I am here to pitch one that you can join us at People Not Prisons, join the volunteer pool, bring any skills that you have. So you hear me going on because I'm a professor, but whatever your job is, bring that. Most of the time in People Not Prisons, I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about where I'm going to show up and the sign that I'm going to hold. So any skills that you have or want to develop, we want you to bring into People Not Prisons. Saturdays, 10 to 12 are our meetings, but for more information, just let us know if you want it. Thanks so much. I will pass it off now to Llewellyn.
Thank you so much, Beth, and good evening, everybody. Thanks to Mass Peace Action for having us this evening. I'm the policy director for the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, and I'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. But I want to start off with a few statistics that every time I think about them, they still startle me. We are a country with less than 5% of the world's population. And yet close to 1 out of 3 women that are incarcerated in the entire world are incarcerated in our country. And I keep asking myself, how is that even remotely possible? How can American women be more dangerous than Danish women or Indonesian women or Ecuadorian women? I mean, what, it's just crazy. Less than 5% of the world's population, and yet close to 1 out of 3 women incarcerated in the entire world is incarcerated here. And Beth talked a moment about how the incarceration of women is just increasing so much. And I just want to say that between 1980 and 2017, the incarceration of women went up 750%, which is just a staggering number. Okay, so I wanted to start off with that. I also wanted to talk about, we had a very interesting situation here with the last couple of years with the pandemic. And I just want to talk about that a little bit because it affected how many women were incarcerated in Massachusetts, right? So in January of last year, we had 876 women incarcerated in Massachusetts. 135 of those were in the state prison in Framingham. And the state prison system is for people who have sentences of 2.5 years or more. The rest of them, that 876 were in county lockups. And in county, what people, when they have a county sentence, it's a shorter sentence. It could be 2 months or 6 months or 1.5 years. And it's also where they put pretrial women, which is women who cannot afford a couple $100 bail. So there are lots and lots of women who are incarcerated who haven't been convicted of anything. They just don't have bail money. So in January of 2020, as I said, we had 876 women total incarcerated in Massachusetts, 135 of which were on a state sentence in Framingham. By June of last year, that number dropped to 443 women. Now, why did that happen? Were they letting people go? Generally not. They weren't. What was happening was that there were very limited court operations. So at the county level, at the pretrial level, they just were not sending people in. And I used to go around and talk to people and say, aren't you terrified that there's like hundreds of dangerous Massachusetts women on the loose? We had 876 in January and we're down to 443. And people would laugh at me, which is like the appropriate response. So as we got down to 443, you kind of wonder, well, why were we incarcerating all of those women? The interesting thing is that the decline was all at the county and pretrial level. Those 135 have remained pretty stable from the beginning of the pandemic to now. There's about 135 there now. So it reached a low in June of 2020. And the latest statistics I have from October 25th of this year, 593. So it's climbing back up. We're back in business. We're almost at 600. We went all the way down to 443. We're up to 600. Whatever. Courts are back in session. We can continue to lock people up. So Families for Justice is Healing, and the National Council has as its mission ending the incarceration of women and girls. And in December of 2019, we discovered that the state had put out a request for proposal to architects to design a new women's prison. And we're like, what? You know, we didn't even know this was happening until it was in progress. And it took a while to figure out how this whole thing worked. Many of you may know that the state legislature every year decides on an operating budget. The House of Representatives and the Senate, discuss and decide what's going to be in the state's operating budget. There's also something called the capital budget, which has to do with the building of buildings. And interestingly enough, we found out that this is totally under the authority of the governor, of Charlie Baker. He doesn't have to open it up for public discussion. He doesn't have to get the approval of the legislature. He can just do it if he wants it. So he has all the power here to construct this prison or not. The one input that the State House has is they have a bonding committee that sets aside, they vote on a certain quantity of money, and it's millions and millions of dollars for the purpose of building new prisons over a 10-year period. So they approve borrowing money for this purpose that the taxpayers then have to pay back. And so in 2018, for a period of 10 years, they authorized millions and millions of dollars to go to the building of new prisons. But it's up to the governor with his capital budget to appropriate a certain quantity of that money to a specific project, okay? So the Department of Correction said, the women's prison is kind of old, would like to replace it. They made that request of the Department of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance, which is known as DCAM. And next thing you know, we're on our way. We're planning this new women's prison with no input from the legislature or from the public, no discussion whatsoever. And, we've tried a bunch of avenues to get this stopped. We've tried, asking the governor to stop it. We've tried, at the point where various architectural firms were competing for the contract, we showed up at design review meetings and we met with architectural firms, and one architectural firm actually pulled out. Another architectural firm was named to design the prison. There have been protests in front of their offices and so forth. But we decided that we didn't want to just take this one avenue. We wanted to find a way that the legislature could weigh in. And that is why we pushed for the moratorium bill. Okay, so we have a bill at the State House. There's a Senate version and there's a House version. The Senate bill is Senate S.2030, and the House version is H.1905. Okay, and those two bills, which are identical, would impose a 5-year moratorium on prison and jail construction. 5 years, just to see what else is possible. The occupancy rate of jails and prisons is really, really low right now. I look at these statistics all the time. System-wide, it's about 60%. I mean, there is no reason to be pouring millions of dollars into new prison and jail construction. And so anyway, this is the avenue that we have chosen to try and stop this new women's prison. If we could get a 5-year pause on prison and jail construction, we could see what else is possible in terms of beginning to decarcerate MCI Framingham. And there's a couple of vehicles for doing that. One is Clemency. I don't know if people are familiar with Clemency, but the President of the United States has the power to shorten a sentence or offer somebody a pardon if they're incarcerated in the federal system. And the governor also has that power at the state level. There has not been a woman granted clemency in Massachusetts since the 1990s. At that time, Governor Weld released 8 women. 4 of them received clemency and another 4 early parole. And, you know, there's been no governor since, not a Republican or a Democrat, who has granted a woman clemency. And it's like they're going to spend $50 million on a new women's prison without even looking at who is there now. Do they represent any threat to public safety? Can they go home? Okay, so that's what we're asking. We're asking that, and there are piles of clemency petitions that have been filed, and nobody's looking at them at the executive branch. So we are really pushing clemency, and we're not only pushing it in Massachusetts, we're pushing it in all the New England states right now. We did a clemency tour this summer, and you know, we're hoping to get the wheels in motion for clemency in all of New England. The other thing that we can do is community placement. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, nobody was let out, hardly anybody was let out early because of the pandemic. There's one exception to that, and that is that the re-entry director for the Middlesex sheriff sent about 8 women home at the beginning of the pandemic. You know, I talked to her on the phone. She said, oh, we sent this one home to her mom, and this one's going back to her boyfriend next week. And, you know, they have to report back once a week to the sheriff's department. But, you know, we made these arrangements. We know this is possible. We can do this, right? So we need to look at these things. You know, we in Families for Justice as Healing and the National Council have an abolitionist vision, which is that we envision the day that prisons and jails are not necessary, but it's not something that we can do overnight. It's not something that we can do tomorrow. It's a long-term vision. We need to start to create alternatives to healing harms that have been done, assuming accountability for one's transgressions and so forth. But, you know, even if you don't have that long-term vision, just about everybody agrees, you know, from the most conservative to the most liberal people, just about everybody agrees that mass incarceration has been a huge mistake. And so by definition, there are people that have been locked up that could go home. So why don't we begin the process of looking at that? You know, I've talked to legislators that say, well, you know, what if we do that and we find out that there's like some really dangerous women and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I said, we'll hang on to them, but let's start to look and see what we can do. Okay, so I just wanted to mention too that with my work as the policy director of the National Council, one of the policies that I work on and try to get implemented in various states is called primary caretakers legislation. And that is legislation that allows the primary caretaker of a dependent child to have a community-based consequence for their transgression rather than incarceration. And this was passed in Massachusetts in 2018. It's been utilized in some cases. It's very much underutilized. We need to do more education around it, demand that it be used more. I found out that this summer, the country of Colombia passed a primary caretakers law, which in fact, it's specific to single mothers, but if you have a offense that would normally have 8 years of incarceration or less, you can get a community-based sentence. So this is not, you know, a radical thing, and we should, you know, seek to fully implement this. There are other policies that we seek to implement. Oregon in 2020 decriminalized possession of all drugs. There's so many people who are locked up for drugs. You know, that's another thing that we can be doing, and any number of other policies. But I just want to say, you know, if people want to take action, what we really need is for people to contact legislators to ask them to support these bills, Senate Bill 2030 and House Bill 1905. The House bill has gone to the Joint Committee on Judiciary, and the Senate bill has gone to a committee called State Administration and Regulatory Oversight. It's a committee that deals with buildings, and judiciary deals with all things having to do with the criminal legal system. Both of these committees have had their public hearings already. In July, we had a public hearing for the Senate bill, and in September, we had a public hearing for the House bill. Right now, we know that Senator Jamie Eldridge, who is the Senate Chair of Judiciary, is in our corner. He fully supports this bill. Representative Michael Day from Winchester is the House Chair of the Judiciary Committee, and we don't really know where he stands, but we hear very nice things about him. He's a reasonable, thoughtful person. And so we need a lot of people to contact Representative Michael Day with a very short script and say, Rep. Day, please support House Bill 1905 and vote it favorably out of committee. Likewise, we're asking people to call Senator Mark Pacheco from Taunton. He is the Senate Chair of the committee where the Senate bill is, and Rep. Antonio Cabral of New Bedford, who is the House Chair. Rep. Cabral seems somewhat favorable to the legislation, and Pacheco needs to be convinced. But the bottom line is they need to hear from a lot of people. Right now, we have a few dozen co-sponsors of these bills.
Llewellyn, just 1 second. Llewellyn,
Yeah.
just 1 second. I would like to invite the audience to put down questions in the chat. So we will have time to a question and answer period. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so we have this flyer posted. If you call, and Senator Eric Lesser is on there too. He's the Senate Vice Chair under Jamie Eldridge on the Judiciary Committee. We already have Senator Eldridge's support, so we're also calling Senator Lesser. If you call, I don't know if you've all done legislative advocacy, but if you call one of these numbers to a Senate office, particularly now in the evening or on the weekend when there's nobody there, it'll go straight to their voicemail. You'll get a message, you've reached the office of Senator Lesser, please leave a message and we'll get back to you. And you can, read the script and tell them to please support this legislation. If you call Rep. Cabral or Rep. Day, the representatives, typically 5 of them or so, share the same telephone numbers. So after you call, you'll hear a recorded voice that says if you want to reach Rep. So-and-so, press 1, Rep. So-and-so, press 2. Both Rep. Day and Rep. Cabral are option 1, when you call their numbers. So you'd call their numbers and then hit option 1 and ask them to please support this legislation. It's got a lot of support already, but we need to make sure these key legislators we have their support, and then it goes to the next step of the process, which is the Ways and Means Committee.
Llewellyn, I suggest that we will take a 5 minutes break right now, and we will ask our audience to go to the phone right now. The phone number is in front of you on the screen. Make a phone call. The text of what to say is there as well. Please, let's make a phone call, all of us, and then it will be nice if we can share actually what happened on the phone a message. So please, let's take a 5 minutes break right now. Let's go to the phone. I'm picking up my phone, and we will call this.
You're muted, Yoav.
I think he's calling.
Yeah, I'm just calling. So I'm inviting everybody to call, and then we can share our experiences.
Do you mind dropping your link in the chat? The window, the screen share is too small, the text.
I don't know how to zoom in, but I can drop the phone numbers if that's easier in the chat.
Do you have a
I can't
link to
hear
the
you.
file? The
Yeah,
URL for the
Hold-
file?
hold on a second. Okay, perfect. I dropped the moratorium bill link and you can find the phone numbers there.
Actually, it was helpful to see the script.
Okay, so
can
maybe I can try to
go
figure out
back
how to
to
zoom
that?
in.
Or can we just go back to that at least?
I just put the phone numbers and the script in the chat as well.
Everyone should mute, I think.
Anybody want to share with us what happened with the phone call?
I'm just wondering if people are getting busy signals as they're, if many people are calling at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I just
Yeah,
called
looks like-
Eric Lesser and left a message.
Looks like
and
some
he
people
said
are
that-
getting voicemails, some people are not. Go ahead, Yo, sorry.
No. I just left a message.
I left a message too.
I left messages.
Woohoo, this is so exciting. Oh, Pachico picked up and said, cool. Wow.
No, that's great.
Yeah, he's
Okay.
working late.
Wow.
I left him a message.
Well, let's all call him again. So, since he's in.
Yeah, he's probably the most difficult one to convince on the list. So it's great that people are calling him.
What is our timeline in terms of the process of approving this bill? And if the moratorium bill is passing, then what? It will be a law, or what's going to be the outcome?
Well, right now, Yoav, the next step is to get voted out of committee, right? So in January of this year is when the bills were, when bills are filed. This past here in 2021, they go through this process of being assigned to committees. As I said, these two bills have gone to different committees. There's a process of a public hearing, which happened already, July for the House bill, July for the Senate bill, September for the House bill. And then by February, sometime before February, the committees have to make a decision on their view of the bill, which is that they will say the committee votes on this favorably, the committee votes no on this bill, or it's sent to study, which is kind of a different way of saying they vote no, right? So if either one of them, because they're identical, if either one of them or both of them is favorably voted out of committee, then it will go to the next committee, which is called Ways and Means. And that's a committee, another joint committee that looks at how much a particular bill would cost the Commonwealth if implemented into law. And so it seems like, you know, a no-brainer or whatever, that this would actually be, you know, less expensive or whatever, but there are, you know, depending on what they want to do, they can, you know, who knows what they're going to do. But that's the next step after the judiciary and state administration process is to go to Ways and Means. And then there are several committees after that, which I know less about. They have funny names like the Committee for the Third Reading and whatnot. And then if it goes through this whole gauntlet of committees, at some point it will go before the House of Representatives for a vote and the Senate for a vote. And if a majority wants it and votes in favor of it, it'll go to the governor's desk to be signed. And if the governor vetoes it, it comes back to the State House, and it needs a 2/3 majority to override the governor's veto. So that's basically the process. The session in Massachusetts, the legislative session, goes from January in the odd numbered years through July of the even numbered years. So, you know, they have to wrap it up by July is my understanding. It might not be the case. It might be just when formal sessions end, and they might still have some time towards the end of the year. I'm not completely sure on that, but basically that's the process.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Llewellyn. Beth, you have your hands up.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making those calls in this moment. I think doing it collectively is super powerful. 4 messages, Allison. That's great. We will absolutely be sending follow-up information and have some takeaways. I just wanted to address a couple of the really important questions that I saw in the chat. Yes. The first one was asking a really common question that we get is about, well, MCI Framingham is a dump, right? It's one of the oldest women's prisons in the United States. It's still in operation. It's disgusting. The formerly incarcerated women that People Not Prisons is led by can testify to that. What's really important is to think about is that the bill includes space for that. The bill includes allowance for repairs, right? It says you can do the repairs that you need. It's not forbidding repairs. But like Sashi has been talking to us about, a plan for a new women's prison means you're going to fill the beds. And Llewellyn is talking about the rising numbers again and how this is incarcerating generations of overly incarcerated populations, right? So this is not about saying that people need to continue to live in squalor. It's saying you can do repairs, but we don't need more beds. We can do so much more with that $50 million. And I'm sure Sashi can speak more about that too. The other question that I wanted to quickly address, someone sent me a message asking about how this bill and the push for women's abolition, the abolition of women's prisons, fits into a larger framework of abolition. So I think what's really important to keep in mind is that generally the conversation about abolition is always because of the numbers, because there's so many more men who are incarcerated than women. When we're talking about abolition, we are talking about men's abolition, right? And so what's, I think, the best part about being a volunteer that works in service of Families for Justice as Healing through People Not Prisons is that this is actually really unique to be in a state where the organizations focus in on the incarceration of women and girls, because so many of the organizations trying to decarcerate in the United States are focused on men because they're just focused on the raw numbers. And so I think it's super important and such an honor to be able to volunteer for an organization that is really focusing in on these targets. Sashi, I'm sure you have more to say. Has Katori gone to bed?
Actually, yeah. So, another way to put it too, that I was kind of like recently introduced is that as we do the work to, I'm a community organizer. And so we're doing like a phenomenal job, just like stopping people from entering inside of a prison and jail period. So this new prison, if we don't get this prison and jail moratorium bill passed, it's just gonna interrupt all the amazing work that community members on the ground are really building and working together. Families for Justice Healing is part of a national movement to really end incarceration of women and girls and resource. So that doesn't just mean shut all the prisons down. It means like get to the root issue of why why women even end up in prison in the first place, and how do we begin to heal those women. If we begin, I believe the number now is about $167,000 Massachusetts spends on incarcerating each woman in Massachusetts. And I always think, like, when I gave you the fact earlier, saying that the number one reason why women even end up in prison is because they don't have access to housing. It costs, on average, it costs about $30,000 to really house a person with dignity. And the fact that Massachusetts is spending $167,000, yet there are women who are struggling to put a roof over their head, it speaks volumes on how we're not putting the people first. And so I'm a part of Families for Justice Healing. I walk on the ground. We always uplift the groundwork first, because we're really the people that are healing the people in the community to really stop the cycle of people from going into prisons and jails. When my mom went to prison, my dad had already gone to prison, and then my mom went to prison, but I just thought it was just a cycle of and eventually I was going to end up in prison as well. And I always say this because I was just like, it was just so numb to me. I was like, it's okay, I'll be there soon, But then through the work of Families for Justice as Healing, I realized that we were under an oppression, and our community is under an oppression. And we're also living in an open air prison and jail, and that's not okay. And so we as community members, we're really working together to shift the narrative that, hey, you will not end up in prison. You may become a doctor, a lawyer, or, somebody that's going to save the world, cure COVID. You can be that person. So I really appreciate Llewellyn uplifting clemency as one of the avenues, because Massachusetts has one of the lowest numbers of women incarcerated, yet we have one of the highest numbers of women serving life. And we have houses like New Beginning Reentry Services, which is a house ran by a formerly incarcerated woman who is positioned to accept 15 women right now that's currently at Framingham. And we need to have more of those houses in the communities. And one thing that I listened to Andrea James is the founder of Families for Justice as Healing. She's formerly incarcerated. She's my mom, and so I have to listen to her all the time. But one of the things that she said when a person said, hey, well, what should we do with all these women? It's like, put them back into their community, like reunite them with their children. I mean, every day we're walking with Shanita and a slug war just trying to bring Miss Angie home after she's been sitting inside of Framingham for 30 years. And so I want to just paint the picture of that. As I say, 30 years, like when Shanita was 3 years old, her mom went to prison, and now Shanita's 33 years old. So that's 30 years that her mom was not in her life. And that's just one of many children in our community. And like, if you can't see the cycle of incarceration just happening from parents just being separated from their children and just being left to roam the community alone, I mean, we need to begin to figure out how do we divert the pathway to prison and really build up our people. And so Beth, we need the support. And so through the long walk, the 90-mile walk that Yohav led, and everybody walked because Yohav was really insane enough to say, we're going to walk 90 miles in 7 days. And we were like, okay, let's figure it out how we do it. But through following you, Yohav, and trying to raise awareness, we realized that there are many people that are standing with us that support that we don't need a new women's prison, and that, hey, you know, we should try to pass it. We should pass this prison and jail moratorium bill, because you know what? We're just asking for a 5-year pause. Like, just take 5 years to just sit back and say, hey, let's try and listen to the directly impacted folks. Let's let them hear what they have to say, listen to their infrastructures. If they're saying that they can increase public safeties in the communities that you're concerned about, which you don't even live in, let's listen to the people that are actually living there. And so when we were doing that long walk, we got to have conversations with folks that were like in Natick. We got to have conversations in West Brookville, and we just raised awareness and we gained allies. And so I dropped a couple of links in the chat. That was a petition that we were able to deliver to the State House on our last day. We also are encouraging, if there's organizations that want to stand with us, to endorse this prison and jail moratorium bill, because we really need the power in the people. This prison and jail moratorium bill is the first. Okay, and I'm proud to be one of the people leading the prison and jail moratorium bill, because it's one of the first prison and jail moratorium bill ever to actually be moving, right? Because it's moving beautifully. I'm like, everybody's standing with it, but it's the first to actually put a 5-year pause on prison and jail construction and really give the communities an opportunity to thrive. And this is a people's bill, and so I really encourage everybody to just walk with us, support us. If one of our sisters was on this call, she would say, pull out your phone and set an alarm. And tomorrow at 12 o'clock, call your legislator again and say that you're walking with us, you're standing with us, and you're in solidarity of the prison and jail moratorium bill. You can follow Families for Justice as Healing. We have a lot of on the ground work throughout Reimagining Communities infrastructure. That's really amazing. That's really helping us build what we vision as public safety and how we feel like we can heal the community as a community. And so it'll be really helpful if people wanted to follow us and learn how to get more involved with that work. And thank you. And I guess I'll pass it back to Beth or Yohav.
Thank you, Sashi, thank you. There is another question here that I think is important, because during the walk that you mentioned, Sashi, I learned a lot about the experience of women in prison and realized what a terrible place it is. So clearly the women in prison do not benefit from the prison. The question is asking, what is the impact of the prison industrial complex in influencing Governor Baker's decision? Who will make money from the prison? Those who run it? Who benefit from it? The community is not benefit from it because we are not safer. So who benefit from it? And what is the power of money in this process? Llewellyn, you want to start?
Yeah, I just want to say that you know, these are jobs for people, you know, these corrections officers. We did some research, and we found out that the highest paid corrections officer in the Department of Correction over the past couple of years earned $270,000 in a single year. And there were many that had salaries over $200,000. And this was on a base salary of $80,000. And I mean, my question was always, how are there enough hours in the day to be able to collect that much overtime on an $80,000 base salary? I don't know. But, it's jobs for these people, and they have a union, and the union offers contributions to the state reps and the state senators. And so, yeah, there's a financial interest there. But when you talk to regular people, again, and I keep saying from the most conservative to the most liberal, nobody's asking for this. Now, I've done a lot of conversations. I've had a lot of conversations with Senator Moran's staff. She represents Plymouth and Falmouth, and her chief of staff said, we live in a very purple district here. There are a lot of, conservative people here. I said, I've talked to conservative people. There's no conservative voters that I've talked to who want us to spend $50 million on a new prison for women, or who want to spend millions of dollars on new prisons for anybody. Nobody wants this except for the people whose careers, if you will, are tied up with, locking up their fellow citizens and, guarding them or whatever. Nobody wants it.
Except the salaries are not included in the 50 million. The 50 million is just for building the prison. Then in addition to it, there is
those salaries are in the operating budget, yeah.
So it will be people against money.
And so,
yes.
Sashi mentioned the figure, I forget what it was, 160,000 or something per woman incarcerated in MCI Framingham. The way that's derived at, you take the total operating budget and you divide it, by the number of women there, and that's what it costs to incarcerate each woman there. And that money is going into salaries. It's all going into salaries.
So the question is now, in addition to making phone calls, what else all of us can do to support the moratorium bill? I know, Beth, you mentioned some options. Let's finish by talking about what other things, what other steps, easy step that people can do to build support for the moratorium bill.
Absolutely. So I just want to definitely second everything Llewellyn was saying. We want different jobs for people, right? We imagine different jobs. When I hear from, prison guards, they all want different jobs. No one's enjoying that, arguably. And the people who are enjoying it, we really, really don't want to be prison guards anymore. So ways to get involved. There are so many. You can join People Not Prisons, our volunteer meeting that meets from 10 to 12 on Saturdays. If that sounds like a lot, you can join one of the, we have actually this weekend, we're having a weekend of action. And so that is going to be community outreach canvassing this weekend. I mentioned I'm going to be in Framingham. People, these different people on this panel, you're going to see everywhere this weekend, standing out, holding signs, getting awareness, because as Yoav, I think, can also speak to, or everyone on the panel, one of the most powerful things about being on the long walk was, as Llewellyn said, not a lot of disagreement, right? Nobody wants this. People were like, what? I had no idea. And honestly, we're walking through neighborhoods that I, thought would be more in favor because they're the least likely to be incarcerated in these spaces. But people were shocked. They agree that we need to use that 50 million for other things. And so we need to get out there. I think these canvassing events are expanding on the idea of the long walk, that people need to know that this is happening. And I loved what Llewellyn was talking about in terms of how undemocratic this has been. Right? There is no voice of the people in this. This is Governor Baker's decision, and he's got his political reasons for doing so. And we all just get to deal with it. But he has run into the wrong crowd, right? We're not going to let it happen. We're going to get organized with you. We're going to have these outreach next weekend. You're going to talk to your friends about it. You're going to address their questions. You're going to, everyone's already got the phone numbers now of the people that we need to be focusing on calling. I find it really fun to call during work hours, because then you can really tell an aide what you think and they will hear you, and it's very validating. So I recommend all of that. Is it important to contact Governor Baker? I'm seeing there. Yeah, writing, that is a good question. I'd love to hear what Llewellyn and Sashi think, but I think it's most important to focus on these key legislators that we're talking about. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think Governor Baker would be a great person for you to also make as your target, especially as we talk about clemency and the fact that Governor Baker has the power to actually pull this whole project apart and really figure out how we can build up the people's voices. And also, you know, he has refused to meet with Families for Justice as Healing numerous times. We have reached out to him a bunch of times to just say, hey, can we have a meeting with you, because we have other solutions and meaningful solutions. And he has refused to even have just a basic conversation with us. Another way that I just wanted, which is very simple, and I'm all about community and sharing the love and spreading the love and just talking to people, which I feel like now that we text so much, we don't have basic conversations. But another way that we could spread the word about the prison and jail moratorium bill is just to simply have a conversation with your neighbor and tell your neighbor about how the prison and jail moratorium bill is important, because just those small conversations can go really far. And then your neighbor will then tell other people, just to say, hey, maybe you can call your legislator. Have you called your legislator? Have you even heard about the prison and jail moratorium bill? And I think that's also just a great way and a small step that you could take if you're going to walk your dog, or just taking the trash out, just having a conversation. In addition to calling your legislator after you set the alarm for tomorrow.
So on these community outreach events here on the weekend, we're going to be in the locations where, you know, these legislators that you called, they're on that sheet, where, you know, we're going to be in their districts, and we're going to be in front of supermarkets, and we're going to hand out the flyer to people, and we're going to ask them to call there. So we will have this continual calling of legislators, and we have focused on the committee chairs. But for instance, a woman reached out to me a few days ago who happens to be in Senator Brownsberger's district in Belmont. And he has a very important role in leadership at the State House. He's the Senate President pro tempore, which means that if Karen Spilka is not available, he fills in as Senate President, and he needs to hear from his constituents. And she had 3 friends who wanted to do this with her. And you know, he wasn't on our list for immediate priorities, but, you know, we got the people in his district, go for it. And, you know, another person, you know, if there are folks on the call from Newton, you know, Senator Cynthia Cream needs to hear from constituents. She tends to be somebody who is with us on a number of things, but it's nice for her to hear from her constituents that they want this moratorium bill. And so, you know, if you reach out to us and say, you know, we'd be happy to see you in New Bedford on Saturday at 11 a.m. But if you are from a different location and there are a couple of you that want to have an additional standout and community outreach and give people flyers and encourage them to call, you know, particularly Senate and House leadership, you know, we would welcome that. We would be very grateful.
Okay, everybody. Any other comments? And anybody would like to end with some comments before we end the meeting?
Yeah, I would like to just say before everybody jumps in to check out our Linktree moratorium bill. You can also go there to get more information about standouts and actions, and you can also get a yard sign. We really have a vision to put in yard signs that say no new prisons or support 2030 H1905 and incarceration of women and girls all throughout Massachusetts. So that way people can say that people are standing with us. It's really hard. We have a lot of signs in the Boston area, but if you live in the outskirts of Boston, if you want a yard sign, we could get you a yard sign that says you support the bill.
Sashi, can you put maybe a phone number or a web address where people can get access to it?
Yes, I'll put it in the
That
chat.
will be great. That will be great.
Thanks, Beth did it. That's true.
Yeah.
Thank
I don't know, is it still reasonable to do house parties, or because of COVID, it is not a practice, it's not a suitable practice right now, because theoretically we can also do house parties.
Hey, Yoav, I just want to mention, this is Claire. I don't know if everybody knows how to save the chat, but it really helps a lot if you just go, you open the chat, you know, at the bottom of the screen, it says chat. You go to the chat and you see to the far right, there's 3 dots. You click on that and you say save chat. Then you'll have all the links and different notes in there that you can look at later. So that way you don't lose it all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
How do you find it later?
Well, it's usually in a folder. When you go to, you know, it's under a Zoom from, there's a page it'll
Zoom
show
folder.
up.
Okay.
If for some reason you can't get it,
We'll also
maybe you
send
can
out those links when we send out the video tomorrow, the next day.
okay, good.
Great,
Good.
thanks.
When you quit Zoom, the transcript should pop up if you've tried to save it while you're in Zoom. I also just really want to uplift, make sure that everyone saw what Andrea James put in the chat, the leader of FJA, and answered the question about the Women's Justice Panel. She said the directive for the Women's Justice Panel was to research and create what's best for women. Many of us on the panel determined the best thing was to decarcerate. And then Hallett and Michi only left room for discussion about building a new prison, right? So how that panel is not listening to the demands that are coming out of the panel. It's really common to see that there's only one answer, right? And all the roads lead back to incarceration and the profit that creates for some people and the extreme debt, trauma, and violence that creates for others.
Okay, everybody. So thank you very much for joining us. You are invited to join the MAPA Racial Justice and Decolonization working group. Send us an email. And if you want to know anything about the campaign, how to get involved, we can also connect you with Sashi, with Beth, and Llewellyn. So thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your actions.
Thank you,
for
Mass
organizing.
Peace Action, for having us. We appreciate you.
Yeah, it was great.
Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, everybody.